Hello YouTube, this is Streamline Carry back with another video. Today I'm going to be talking about the titanium and G10 frame lock version of the Spyderco Military in CPM M4. This knife was a collaboration between Spyderco and a website called Knifeworks, which is very cool. You should check it out if you've never seen it. But they made about 500 of these, and it is essentially the same design as the standard Spyderco Military, except that sort of as an homage to Strider knives, half of the knife is titanium and half of it is G10. What this allows is for the implementation of what's called a reeve integral lock, and that is the lock that you see here, which is actually integrated into the titanium slab. So it is very similar in function to the standard liner lock on the normal military, except that the locking mechanism itself is actually in the slab rather than embedded in a liner inside of the handle. Now, some people will debate whether this is actually any stronger than a liner lock. I tend to think that it is, because the slab which contacts the tang of the blade is actually very thick. You can see here it's quite a bit thicker than it is on the standard military. And also, Spyderco in this particular version and in updated versions of the all titanium military has placed this steel plate inside, which screws in to the titanium slab, such that in the actual lock mechanism you have steel on steel. So that titanium is not actually touching the steel at the base of the blade, it's actually touching the steel insert here. Secondarily, the steel insert functions as what's called an over-travel stop. And what that means is, if you were to use this knife over and over for many years, and you were to push the lever out of the way to close the blade, you may hyperextend it, push it too far. And what this can do over time is basically train the metal to be hyperextended, and so that when you lock it, it will not lock nice and deep like that, and the lock will become shallower over time and thus weaker, in theory anyway. So what they've implemented here is, in this steel insert there's a tab, which you can't see unfortunately in the back, that prevents over travel. So if I push this, you can kind of hear it. Well, let me do it from this position. I actually can't push it any further than that. And some people may say, well, it's actually touching the clip here when you push, which I will agree, it does touch the clip, but the over travel mechanism helps if you were to use this without the clip, say you carried it with a lanyard in your pocket or in a bag or whatever. Outside of that, what makes this knife extremely special and very rare is the blade steel. It is steel that Spyderco has only used in, to my knowledge, one other folding knife, which is the Gale Bradley, and that is CPM M4, and that's kind of dirty, unfortunately, but it's CPM M4, and this steel has been very popular in the cutting contest community. It is not a stainless steel, so typically it is not used in folders, which is probably why there's only one other model that Spyderco makes that uses this steel. And other manufacturers that have used it in the past generally will coat the blade so that rust is not an issue, rust and or staining. I actually happen to like the fact that Spyderco chose to make a version of the military, albeit very limited, that had this somewhat exotic blade steel that is not stainless. Having a steel that is not required to be stainless allows the metallurgists to design it in a way that it has desirable properties that stainless steels don't have. This particular blade has extremely hard heat treat, so it's approximately 63. Different people will tell you different things, and there have been some measurements that I've seen online above about 63 to 63.5 on the Rockwell scale hardness, whereas a standard military, which is CPM S30V, also an excellent blade steel, although stainless, as a Rockwell generally of about 58 to 59. Now, in many cases, that hardness would also lend itself to being easily chipped. But because this blade is not required to be stainless, it can be very hard but also not chip, as in not brittle. So that's part of why it's been so popular in cutting contests, because you can use it aggressively, you can do high-speed cuts without worrying about your blade chipping out or breaking or any of that. And so the disadvantage, obviously, especially in a folding knife, is that you tend to get things trapped, especially down in the pivot, as in gunk or moisture, most dangerously, and the blade can rust. So this knife is higher maintenance. It demands a higher level of care, a higher level of attention than a standard knife would. But for that, you do get something. You get a knife that is extremely sharp, stays sharp for a very long time, and does not really have any problem with chipping or fractures of any kind. So I can't really show you very easily how sharp this is, but I can assure you that it is extremely sharp and will stay extremely sharp for a long time. I do have some paper. I know this is kind of a somewhat of a lame test, and that a lot of people will say it doesn't really tell you much, but either way, you can see it's quite sharp. And I haven't really sharpened this in a while, actually. But let's see if we can get a few little curly cues, but nothing too impressive. But anyway, I'll tell you that in general use, it is extremely sharp, and it stays extremely sharp. A lot of stainless blades will be scalpel sharp, shaving sharp, right after you sharpen them, but then they fairly quickly fall down into kind of a utility level sharp that is not quite shaving sharp. This, because of its properties and the fact that it's not stainless, stays sharp for a very long time. So that's awesome. Part of the downside, though, I will tell you, is that this knife has a tendency to stain. In addition to the, I would say, increased risk of rust, it does have a tendency to stain. This one I have polished up a little bit, and it doesn't really have much patina or staining or oxidation on the blade. But I was just noticing in preparation for doing this review that actually here on the bottom of the tang, and hopefully I can kind of get in there so you can see this. Well, it's a little shadowy, but maybe you can make it out a little bit. There is actually a fair amount of stain and or rusting in there, and I think part of what contributed to that is that Spyderco intentionally does not polish that section of the blade, and in other words, the portion of the tang which contacts the lock surface. They intentionally do not polish that so that as the lock mechanism wears in, it will bed in properly, and you will not have any issues with blade wiggle as time wears on. So I'm going to have to take some corrective action and take this apart and see what I can do about that. It should be very easily fixable because it does appear to just be basically surface rust and or maybe some staining. So you know, that demonstrates the increased maintenance demanded by a non-stainless folding knife. In addition, it is an increased risk over a stainless blade that you may get some kind of corrosion inside the pivot. And so I would say that if you have a non-stainless folder, even if it is coated, because often if the blade is coated, then not necessarily the section inside the pivot is coated, that you disassemble it once in a while and inspect it, and then of course re-lubricate it when you're done. That will help to keep out moisture and hopefully also keep out any potential corrosion or staining that you may experience. And staining, even though you don't see the inside of the knife, it's still oxidation on the surface which can slow down the opening of the knife. So that's a little bit about the differences between this knife and a standard Spyderco Military. I'm going to go ahead and also talk about some of the features that this might share with the military, but things that I believe make it desirable. So this particular lock mechanism, the titanium frame lock, is extremely tight. It is very nice, and also it has an extremely positive engagement, so that when you open it, it really feels nice. It's very smooth to open, and also when it locks up, it feels extremely solid. Some people also maintain that the frame lock is advantageous because as you squeeze the knife, if you use it and you squeeze it, you are actually squeezing the lock shut, so that it is very difficult to accidentally disengage. I did make a point in the other video about the paramilitary too, that if you are using a liner lock, and this applies to frame locks as well, and you are twisting the blade, then you need to be extra careful that you are not twisting the blade in such a way that you are disengaging the lock, because that is actually very possible to do accidentally, and of course can be very deleterious to your hand. Now, this design does include a choil, which if you're using that, it sort of acts as a secondary safety, so that even if you were somehow to close this and you had your finger choked up in that choil, the unsharpened portion of the blade would come down and sort of put pressure on your finger, but it would not actually cut you, which is excellent. So I really like this knife. Another small carry advantage that it holds over the standard military is this nice smooth surface on the titanium side, which goes in and out of your pocket very smoothly, very nicely, and yet is strong enough, combined with this rather tight spring clip, to secure itself in your pocket. Another thing is that I do actually like this section at the top that sticks out of your pocket a little bit, for two basic reasons. One of them is that it shortens the distance that this has to go inside your pocket. Let's say your pocket is just barely deep enough to carry this. If you had the clip all the way at the top, then this would bottom out in the pocket before the clip was fully sunk at the top. So it sort of balances the amount inside and out of inside the pocket and outside of the pocket, such that you do not have to have a pocket depth that is the entire length of the knife, which with a longer knife like this one is nice. I also made a point in another video that as you pinch this section to pull it out, you are not pinching anything that would increase the clasping pressure of the clip to the material that you're trying to pull the knife out of. In other words, if this clip were a full deep ride clip and I pinched here, I would be doing the equivalent of pinching this section, which actually makes the clip stronger. So you're fighting yourself, trying to grab it and pull it out, and as you're doing that, the harder you grab, the harder it is to pull out. So I do like having this little section up here, and as well these three screws, the three torque screws securing the clip, sort of give you a little bit of a reference point for your finger to grab, as well as a nice little grip indentation. So kind of in conclusion, this is a very specialty knife. There are only about 500 of these in the market, and there was a very long waiting list. I waited almost an entire year to get this. But it's just kind of an interesting piece, and I do carry it, I do use it, as I do almost all my knives. I'm not really into collecting. So I really like this knife for some of its special properties, even if it does demand a higher level of care and maintenance than a standard stainless folder would. I will probably have another review later, or I would say an overview, of the standard military, which is also an extremely awesome knife, and for the money is really almost untouchable in my opinion, because for about 125 bucks you can get one of the best built larger folders on the market. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of go over this and give you some of my opinions and thoughts on it. And I really want to give a thanks to Spyderco as well as Knifeworks who made this happen. The guy's name is Roger over there, so kind of a shout out to him. Pretty awesome that he was able to get this all done. So anyway, thanks so much for watching, and thank you Spyderco for making such a cool piece. And I appreciate it, guys. Take care. I'll see you soon.